It's Punch Day! 大光です。じゃあ、ハリポタの続きをやっていきます。Now what? Said Aunt Petunia, looking furiously at Harry as though he'd planned this. Harry knew he ought to feel sorry that Mrs. Fig had broken her leg. But it wasn't easy when he reminded himself it would be a whole year before he had to look at the tablets. Slowly, Mr. paused and tapped again. We could form Marge, Uncle Vernon suggested. Don't be silly, Vernon. She hates the boy. The Dursleys often spoke about Harry like this, as though he wasn't there, or rather, as though he was something very nasty that couldn't understand them, like a slug. What about what's her name? Your friend, Ivone? Oh, holiday in Majorca, snapped Aunt Petunia. You could just leave me here. Harry put in. Hopefully, he'd be able to watch what he wanted on television for change, and maybe even have a go on Dudley's computer. Aunt Petunia looked as though she'd just swallowed a lemon. And come back and find the house in ruins? She snarled. I won't blow up the house, said Harry, but they weren't listening. I suppose we could take him to the zoo, said Aunt Petunia slowly, and leave him in the car. That car's new. He's not sitting in it alone. Dudley began to cry loudly. In fact, he wasn't really crying. It had been years since he'd really cried, but he knew that if he screwed up his face and wailed, his mother would give him anything he wanted. Dinky Daddy Dance, don't cry. Mommy won't let him spoil your special day, she cried, flinging her arms around him. I don't want him to come, Dudley yelled between her huge pregnant sobs. He always spoils everything. He shot Harry a nasty grin through the gap in his mother's arms. Just then, the doorbell rang. Oh, good Lord, they're here, said Aunt Petunia frantically. And a moment later, Dudley's best friend, Pierce Porkis, walked in with his mother. Pierce was a scrawny boy with a face like a rat. He was usually the one who held people's arms behind their backs while Dudley hit them. Dudley stopped pretending to cry at once. Half an hour later, Harry, who couldn't believe his luck, was sitting in the back of the Dudley's car with Pierce and Dudley. On the way to the zoo for the first time in his life, his aunt and uncle hadn't been able to think of anything else to do with him. But before they left, Uncle Vermont had taken Harry aside. I'm warning you, he had said, putting his large purple face right up close to Harry's. I'm warning you now, boy. Any funny business, anything at all, and you'll be in that cupboard from now until Christmas. I'm not going to do anything, said Harry, honestly. But Uncle Vermon didn't believe him. No one ever did. The problem was strange things often happened around Harry and it was just no good telling the Dursleys he didn't make them happen. Once, Aunt Petunia, tired of Harry coming back from the barbers looking as though he hadn't been at all, had taken a pair of kitchen scissors and cut his hair so short while he was almost bald except for his fringe, which she left to hind let let which she left to hide that horrible scar. Dudley had laughed himself silly at Harry, who spent a sleepless night imagining school the next day, where she was already laughed at for his baggy clothes and self-taped glasses. Next morning, however, he had got got up to find his hair exactly as it had been before Aunt Petunia had sheared it off. He had been given a week in his cupboard for this, even though he had tried to explain that he couldn't explain how it had grown back so quickly. Another time, Aunt Petunia had been trying to force him into a revolting old jumper of Dudley's brown with orange bubbles. The harder she tried, the harder she tried to pull it over his head, the smaller it seemed to become, until until finally it might have fitted a glove puppet, but certainly wouldn't fit Harry. And Petunia had decided it must have shrunk in the wash and to his great relief, Harry wasn't punished. On the other hand, he'd got into terrible trouble for being found on the roof of the school kitchens. Dudley's gang had been chasing him as usual when, as much to Harry's surprise as anyone else's. There, had, there he was sitting on the chimney. The Dursleys had received a very angry letter from Harry's headmistress telling them Harry had been climbing school buildings. But all he tried to do, as he shouted at Uncle Vernon through the locked door of his cupboard, was jump behind the big bench outside the kitchen doors. Harry supposed that the wind must have caught him in mid-jump. But today, nothing was going to go wrong. It was even worth being with Dudley and appeared to be spending the day somewhere that wasn't school. His cupboard or Mrs. Flick's cabbage-smelling living room. While he drove, Uncle Vernon complained to Aunt Petunia. He liked to complain about things. People at work, Harry, the council, Harry, the bank and Harry were just a few of his favorite subjects. This morning, it was motorbikes. Motorbikes, rolling, rolling, rolling along like maniacs. The young hoodlums, he said, as a motorbike overtook them. I had a dream about a motorbike, said Harry. remembering suddenly. It was flying. Uncle Vermon nearly crashed into the car in front. He turned right around in his seat and yelled at Harry. His face, his face like a gigantic beet, beet, beetroot, beetroot with a mustache. Motorbikes don't fly. Dudley and Pierce sniggered. I know they don't, said Harry. It was only a dream. But he wished he hadn't said anything. If there was one thing that Dudley hated even more than his asking questions, it was his talking about anything acting in a way it shouldn't. No matter if it was in a dream or even a cartoon, they seemed to think he might get dangerous ideas. It was a very sunny Saturday and the zoo was crowded with families. The Dursleys bought Dudley and Pierce large chocolate ice creams at the entrance at them, because the smiling lady in the van had asked Harry what he wanted before they could hurry him away. They bought him a cheap lemon ice lolly. It wasn't bad either, Harry thought, licking it as they watched a gorilla scratching its head and looking remarkably like Dudley. Expect that it wasn't blonde. Harry had the best morning he'd had in a long time. He was careful to walk a little way apart from the Dursleys so that Dudley and Pierce, who were starting to get bored with the animals by lunchtime. Wouldn't fall back on their favorite hobby of overheating him. They are in the zoo restaurant, and when Dudley had a tantrum because his knickerbocker glory wasn't big enough, Uncle Vernon bought him another one, and Harry was allowed to finish the first. Harry felt afterwards. Harry felt afterwards that he should have known it was all too good to last. After lunch, they went to the reptile house. It was cool and dark in here, with lit windows all along the walls. Behind the glass, all sorts of lizards and snakes were crawling and slithering over bits of wood and stone. Dudley and Pierce wanted to see huge, poisonous cobras and thick, man-crushing pythons. Dudley quickly found the largest snake in the place. It could have wrapped its body twice around Uncle Vermon's car and crushed it into a dustbin. But at the moment, it doesn't look in the mood. In fact, it was fast asleep. Dudley stood with his nose pressed against the glass, staring at the glistening brown coals. Make it move, he whined at his father. Uncle Vermont tapped on the glass, but the snake didn't budge. Do it again, Dudley ordered. Uncle Vermont lapped the grass smoothly with his knuckles, but the snake just snoozed on. This is boring, Dudley moaned. He shuffled away. Harry moved in front of the tank and looked intently at the snake. He wouldn't have been surprised if it had died of boredom itself. No company expects stupid people drumming their fingers on the glass trying to disturb it all day long. It was worse than having a cupboard as a bedroom, where the only visitor was Aunt Petunia hammering on the door to wake you up. At least he got to visit the rest of the house. The snake suddenly opened its bedly eyes. Slowly, very slowly. It raised its head until its eyes were on a level with Harry's. It winked, Harry said. Then he looked quickly around to see if anyone was watching. They weren't. He looked back at the snake and winked too. The snake jerked its head towards until Uncle Barmon and Dudley, then raised its eyes to the ceiling. It gave Harry a look that said quite plainly, "I get that all the time." "I know," Harry murmured Harry murmured through the glass, though he wasn't sure the snake could hear him. "It must be really annoying." The snake nodded vigorously. Time vigorously ってなんだっけ。やっぱり元気よくだな。Where do you come from, anyway? Harry asked. The snake jabbed its tail at the little sign next to the glass. Harry peered at it. Boa constrictor Brazil. Was it not there? The boa constrictor jabbed its tail at the sign again and Harry read on. This specimen was bred in the zoo. Oh, I see. So you've never been to Brazil? As the snake shook its head, a deafening shout behind Harry made both of them jump. "Dudley! Mr. Dudley! Come and look at this snake! You won't believe what it's doing!" Dudley came wading towards them as fast as he could. "Out of the way! Out of the way, you!" he said, punching Harry in the ribs. Caught by surprise, Harry fell hard on the concrete floor. What came next happened so fast no one saw how it happened. 1 second. Pierce and Dudley were leaning right up close to the glass. The next, they had leaped back with howls of horror. Harry sat up and gasped. The glass front of the boa constrictor's tank had vanished. The great snake was uncoiling itself rapidly, slithering out onto the floor. People throughout the reptile, reptile house screamed and started running for the exits. As the snake slid swiftly past him, Harry could have sworn a low, hissing voice said, "Brazil, here I come. Thanks, amigo." The keeper of the reptile house was in shock. But the glass, he he kept saying, "Where did the glass go?" The zoo director himself made Aunt Petunia a cup of strong sweet tea while he apologized over and over again. Pierce and Dudley could only give her. As far as Harry had seen, the snake hadn't done anything except snap playfully at their heels as it passed. But by the time they were all attacking Uncle Vermon's car, Dudley was telling them how it had nearly bitten on off his leg, while Pierce was swearing it had tried to squeeze him to death. But worst of all, for Harry at least, was Pierce calming down enough to say, "Harry was talking to it. Weren't you, Harry?" Uncle Vermon waited until Uncle Pierce was safely out of the house before starting on Harry. He was so angry he could hardly speak. He managed to say, "Go, cupboard, stay, no meals," before he collapsed into a chair and Aunt Petunia had to run and get him a large brandy. Harry lay in his dark cupboard much later, wishing he had a watch. He didn't know what time it was, and he couldn't be sure the Dudleys were asleep yet. Until they were. He couldn't risk sneaking to the kitchen for some food. He'd lived with the Dudleys almost 10 years, 10 miserable years, as long as he could remember. Ever since he'd been a baby and his parents had died in that car crash. He couldn't remember being in the car when his parents had died. Sometimes, when he strained his memory during long hours in his cupboard, he came up with a strange vision, a blinding flash of green light and a burning pain on his forehead. This, he supposed, was the crash, though he couldn't imagine where all the green light came from. He couldn't remember his parents at all. His aunt and uncle never spoke at them, and of course he was forbidden to ask questions. There were no photographs of them in the house. When he had been younger, Harry had dreamed and dreamed of some unknown relation coming to take him away. But it had never happened. The Dursleys were his only family. Yet sometimes he thought, or maybe hoped, the strangers in the street seemed to know him. Very strange strangers they were, too. A tiny man in the violet top had brought to him once while out shopping with Aunt Petunia and Dudley. After asking Harry furiously if he knew the man, Aunt Petunia had rushed them out of the shop without buying anything. A wild-looking old man dressed all in green had waved merrily at him once on a bus. A bald man in a very long purple coat had actually shaken his hand in the street the other day and then walked away without a word. The weirdest thing about all these people was the way they seemed to vanish the second Harry tried to get a closer look. At school, Harry had no one. Everybody knew that Dudley's gang hated that old Harry Potter in his baggy old clothes and broken glasses, and nobody liked to disagree with Dudley's gang. はい、チャプター2終わり。30分かかってないからまだ途中からだからな。一旦終了します。サリュー。